The pressure on Tehran has entered a decisive phase, and this Wednesday, April 15th, 2026, what we see is a clear retreat by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran. Faced with the combined force, the United States naval blockade, and the threat of a new military escalation, Donald Trump stated that talks to end the war may resume in Pakistan in the next 2 days, and the UN itself has already admitted that it is highly likely these negotiations will restart. After weeks of defiance, the Iranian regime returns to the table because it was hit at its most sensitive point: the sea, oil, and its ability to keep its system intact. What happened in practice was simple to understand. The United States began blocking ships entering or leaving Iranian ports in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. According to Reuters and AP, this action has already disrupted Iran's maritime trade, made ships turn back, and brutally tightened the regime's economy. The war, which began on February 28 after attacks by the United States and Israel against Iran, has now reached a point where economic pressure weighs almost as much as the bombings. That's what explains the new sense of urgency. This is the new center. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard has agreed to return to the logic it previously rejected, which is to negotiate under pressure. The 2-week ceasefire ends on April 21, and Trump has already indicated that he prefers a quick agreement to another round of destruction. Where is this supposed to happen? In Islamabad, Pakistan, which has returned to the center of mediation. The American proposal calls for a 20-year suspension of nuclear activities, while Tehran is working with 3 to 5 years. And there's another decisive point. The head of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, warned that any agreement without strict oversight will be merely symbolic. In other words, it's not enough to announce peace. It will be necessary to prove that the regime has truly backed down. The impact of this turnaround has already moved beyond the military sphere and entered the global economy. Reuters reported that benchmark oil returned to nearly $96 per barrel after the news that Iranian maritime trade had been halted. AP also highlighted the strategic weight of this measure because, from Israel's perspective, it affects one of the most sensitive routes on the planet. The message is even tougher. For Israel, the ceasefire does not erase the strategic goal of dismantling the Iranian threat at its root. In June 2025, Benjamin Netanyahu already said that a regime change could be the result of Israeli attacks. Now, the international press has once again reported that the head of Mossad, David Barnea, maintains that the mission only ends when this regime is replaced. In other words, Trump is working to secure the truce, but Israel signals that a military pause does not mean the end of political pressure. The regime change plan remains on Israel's horizon, even if the path to achieving it is longer and harder than many imagined at the beginning of the war. And why does this matter so much now? Because Israel doesn't just want a pause. Israel wants to prevent Tehran from surviving, breathing, and coming back stronger. The United States wants an agreement that neutralizes the nuclear threat, the missiles, and the blackmail over the Strait of Hormuz. But this game has a clear limit. Reuters itself showed back in March that Israeli officials already acknowledged there was no certainty of the immediate fall of the Iranian government, and they saw no clear sign of an uprising capable of overthrowing it, just with bombings. This explains the current strategy. Since the regime didn't fall on its own, the pressure had to change form. Less expectation of instant collapse and more blockade. Forced negotiation and prolonged attrition. So the current picture is this. The ones backing down now are the military leadership, who promised total confrontation and now find themselves forced to negotiate. What's at stake isn't just a pause in the shooting, but the future of the Iranian regime. When does this happen? At the most critical moment since the start of the war, with the truce about to end. How? With ships blocked, trade suffocated, oil under tension, and armed diplomacy. And why? Because Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard realized that sustaining a long war under blockade became too expensive. While Israel made it clear that it will not simply go back to the previous point, Iran tried to transition, to turn the sea into an instrument of intimidation, but it encountered a bigger barrier than it expected. By challenging the United States Navy, Tehran entered a game in which every mistake is too costly. Ships retreated, maritime trade was stifled, the ceasefire clock keeps ticking. And negotiations returned to the center because the Iranian regime realized that continuing down this path could mean more wear and tear, more isolation, and less control over its own crisis. It's not a surrender signed on social media. It's not a surrender signed on paper. However, in the strategic field, the beginning of a forced surrender is already appearing. What